I don't have a set of prepared remarks like that I can get through really quickly and coherently. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do the thing that I do the least well. I'm going to think in public, because I've been sitting here the entire time that we've been talking, trying to really think about the message and what this room is. And let me tell you what occurs to me. As I look around this room, if I had to write down who was going to be in this room today, I would have hit it at about 99%, because if we have a meeting on resilience in Washington, D.C., you're the people or you're the organizations who are going to be here. So to some degree, we're talking to ourselves, and we've got to expand the conversation. Now, what I heard today was really good, because it was talking about expanding the conversation to those people who do national legislation, who do national policy, who write those kinds of things, and that's vital. But I would submit that it's not enough. It is critical that we get all of those things that Julie just talked about done in legislation and in policy, because they will provide the incentives that the nation's mayors and leaders down at the community level can use, both politically and actually, to make their communities more resilient. But we've got to get the message down to them also. And we may have to do it in a different way. So I saw the great video that was up there, and we talked about damage and how much damage there is and how many storms we've had, and we've been doing that for years. And we have become, at the community level, a nation of lessons observed and not lessons learned. We're seeing the same things over and over again, and we aren't doing anything about them. We're not scaring people into compliance. Why not? Well, if you go down and talk to people at the community level, and I do a lot of that, you'll hear four things very consistently from the mayors, from the business leaders. One is, oh, it won't happen. Two is, well, if it happens, it won't happen to me. Well, if it happens to me, it won't be as bad as they say. Well, if it's as bad as they say, there's nothing I can do about it anyway. So we've got to find an additional message rather than the disaster message, and it's a positive message. It's a message about what happens when your community is on a trajectory toward resilience. What happens when you adopt, what do we know about resilience? We know far more about resilience than we did when I got into this area 10, 15 years ago. 10, 15 years ago, when we talked about resilience, we talked about ecological resilience. We talked about how stagnant ponds became unstagnant when we changed the ecology. We talked about material resilience. We talked about health resilience. But we didn't talk about full societal resilience. We know so much more about that now. We know that if you have building codes, if you have established building codes, that they are foundational for your infrastructure, so that whatever happens in your community, you're able to recover more quickly and get your people back to work. We know so many more things, but we're not applying those things. And this is going to have to be not just a top-down, it's going to have to be a bottoms-up effort. So we're going to have to find another message to get to the nation's mayors and people who make investments, and it's got to be a positive message. It's got to be that if your community is on an upward trajectory, whether or not a disaster happens, you're going to be a better place to live. You're going to be a better place to invest. And if the disaster happens, you're going to recover quicker and faster. And that's based on your understanding of your vulnerabilities and putting yourself, doing some proactive things to do that. ICC, in addition to building codes and understanding that building codes is a fundamental of resilience and the basis on which we build resilience, has come together with a number of other organizations, and they're growing daily. My own organization, the Community and Regional Resilience Institute, the coalition around earthquakes, the U.S. Resiliency Council, have come together to form something called the Alliance for National and Community Resilience, or ANCR. The purpose for that is to take on a pretty big load of trying to create a process that is able to measure communities' resilience across the full spectrum of resilience. So not just the infrastructure, not just the buildings, but the infrastructure, the economy, and the society. Big lift. But you know, just having good infrastructure and resilient infrastructure won't necessarily build resilient communities. We need a resilient economy. If you're a small town, and the largest employer in your town leaves and goes offshore, you've got a problem. I once sat with the old mayor of Charleston, South Carolina, Mayor Joe Riley. He was down there for about 140 years, I think, as the mayor. We said, Mr. Mayor, we came come down to look at your community because we think, looking at Hurricane Hugo, that you're a really resilient place. And he said, well, we think we're kind of resilient too, but you've got the wrong disaster. What was a disaster? Well, in 1993, the Navy came to us and said, we're closing your Navy base. And in 1995, it was gone. He said that was a disaster. And it made us understand that it's not just the buildings. They may be foundational, but it is buildings. So ANCR wants to do a couple of things. We want to put together a way of, we want to, in a collaboration with as many of you as we can get on board, we want to understand what resilience looks like to a community across all of its domains. Then we want to be able to measure that or assess it where we can measure it. And we want to be able to provide to mayors a simple, usable, practical way that they can assess their communities and find where their trajectories are. Find out where their strengths and weaknesses are and give them something to do about that. So that's what we're about, and we think that in addition to all the great work that's going on in coalitions like this, to influence legislation, to influence policy, to get the right incentives placed into public policy and legislation, and quite frankly, to get some of the disincentives that are there now removed. In addition to that, we need a grassroots effort that actually empowers mayors, people who are going to invest in communities, community leaders to understand their resilience and do something about it from the bottom up.